Hello and welcome to Cafe DC. I'm Faiz Rahman, and our guest today is a prominent Pakistani lawyer and a politician, Mr. Waleed Iqbal. We'll get a little bit more about Mr. Iqbal and his affiliations and also his background, but let's just talk to him about current Pakistani political state. Thank you, sir, for joining us on such a short notice.
Thank you.
Welcome to DC.
Thanks.
So far, how do you like this area, the DC area?
Oh, I like visiting DC. Last time was when I visited was maybe 12 years or so ago when I used to work in New York. Mm-hmm. But I have also spent one whole summer interning at the World Bank when I was.
Okay, so that's right here. That's very close.
Yeah, so I was working there, and I always enjoyed very much visiting Georgetown, mm-hmm. because I was at that time living very close to Georgetown. So this time when I came to visit Washington DC yesterday, I got in. I chose a hotel in Georgetown itself.
Oh, okay.
So it's very nice
to get a little bit more feel of the.
Very nice surrounds, and
yes.
It's very, very vibrant.
Absolutely.
And lively.
Absolutely. Waleed Saab, you are basically a product of American legal education. You went to Harvard, and then you also spent time as a lawyer. And I understand you were registered here as well, right? To practice law.
I was admitted in the state of New York.
Yes.
I continue to be so.
And so you can at least still practice.
Attorney,
yes,
yeah,
good.
Yes, yeah.
And now you're based in Lahore, Pakistan, and a prominent corporate lawyer. What's the difference? What you see in terms? Of course, these are two very different legal systems. Pakistan's is based on the British jurisprudence, and this one is like different, a lot different. So how do you see the current state of affairs when it comes to the legal system in Pakistan?
You see, when I qualified from the States, I spent about 3.5 years working here in New York, and then I moved to Europe, and I spent about the same amount of time, about 3.5 years. So, and I got admitted as an English solicitor as well. But my first qualification was from Pakistan. So I got admitted in 3 jurisdictions, and I have had a feel for the work in all 3 systems: the US, particularly the state of New York, the English law system in Europe, and then of course Pakistan. So there was a transition between, and I have to say, I have to call it a transition, because the work is the most cutting edge in the States, particularly in New York, where I was trained, and where I worked, where I learned on the job. The turnaround time, the attention to detail, the meticulousness with which they work. So the level of, I think, the most sophisticated level of lawyering, corporate lawyering, was manifesting itself over here, and that's what I experienced. In Europe, the work is very similar. I mean, when you say, or you just said that the American system and the British system and Pakistan is based on the British system, actually they're all Anglo-Saxon. So there are a lot of similarities. So there is a lot of serious transactional work in Europe as well, a lot of large transactions. But I think the level of detail to which attention was given here in the States, it's very high quality work in Europe as well, but it's much more cutting edge here in the States, and it is reflected. For example, a New York law firm or a New York qualified lawyer commands a higher hourly rate in the international arena as compared to an English lawyer. So there is that difference. And then in Pakistan, of course, the market is very small, because it's a small economy, so you don't see the kinds of transactions.
You're talking about corporate law.
Corporate law, exactly. Yeah, the market is small.
Otherwise, the market is huge.
Otherwise, Pakistan has about 110,000 registered lawyers, but there is the corporate work is confined to, I would say, maybe 200 or 300 lawyers at most. And when you talk about law firms, establishments that are structured in a proper law firm format, they are literally, like, I would say, less than 20 or 30. Nice. And at that, the ones that do the top level work, maybe just around 10. So because of this market size being small in that sense, and the size of the transactions and the deal flow, as they call it here in America, is not the way it is in Europe or in the States. And also for that reason, you don't tend to specialize. You can't say that I'm an M&A lawyer or a capital markets lawyer or a banking lawyer. You pretty much have to be a generalist. But having said all of that, I think quality always has its market, and there is very high quality work that corporate lawyers do in Pakistan as well.
And your, I think the clients would be like mostly foreign clients, corporations, or also like local?
There is a mix. I have clients actually in New York and in Washington, D.C. also. I'm seeing one of them on this trip. And there are European companies that are doing business in Pakistan. And in addition to that, there are some large Pakistani business houses which are spread over various types of industries and businesses. There are 4 or 5 of them, if not more. The concept of what you would see in the US at one time, what you call a conglomerate. So they are in banking, they are in insurance, they are in manufacturing, they are in textiles, chemicals, aviation, all one business house is doing all those things. And those business houses are even becoming Pakistani multinationals. They are establishing businesses in England, in the Gulf, in Oman, in Saudi Arabia, in Canada. There's all kinds of interesting stuff going on over there. Of course, the scale is smaller.
Exactly. I see with this discussion that your first passion is definitely law. That's what the way you talk about this Russian and the comparison. Thank you very much. But there's so much else to your personality. You're also a politician, and a politician. I don't know yet, but quite successful with a quite successful party, Tehreek-e-Insaf. Tell us something about your political transition. I mean, first, I would like to know why at least quite a few lawyers, they end up being politicians as well. It's here, it's in Europe, and also you see that in Pakistan. Quite a few prominent lawyers, they become very prominent politicians. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was one, single.
Muhammad Ali Jinnah,
exactly,
was one. Allama Iqbal was a lawyer. They all trained as lawyers.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So, what is it with the lawyers that you want to be a politician?
Well, I think worldwide, and you forgot to mention countries like Canada and Australia, which have similar systems.
Yes.
Constitutional structures as
Anglo-Saxon,
Commonwealth countries, Anglo-Saxon. In my own case, because I had spent, as I counted just before you, as a professional, I spent 7 or 8 years abroad. And this is aside from the time I spent as a student. I was educated in the States as an undergraduate. I came here for law school, and in between, I got 1 law degree in Pakistan and a graduate and master's degree at Cambridge in England. So after my international career as a lawyer, when I moved back to Pakistan, this was approximately 10 and a half, 11 years ago, towards the end of 2004. My first priority was to establish myself as a professional. I had been away for so long. I had done a couple of years of practice in Pakistan. So I was not a known commodity. And in the service industry, you have to establish yourself. So I practically started from zero 10 years ago. And by the grace of God, the work picked up, and
Despite your family background.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. I'm just a little.
Yeah, but what I was going to say was that there came a point when I felt that I had established myself professionally in Pakistan after having spent 6 or 7 years working. And yes, I spent 20 years, close to 20 years in the field of law, so it does occupy most of my time. And it's only for 3 years that I have been in the field of politics. I joined 3.5 years now. On the 8th of November 2011, I joined the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf. And I did, the reason for that generally was that, yes, certainly like any other responsible and conscientious citizen of a country, I wanted to be of service. I wanted to get involved in public service.
So why did you choose Tehreek-e-Insaf?
Yeah, that's what I was going to come to. The first part was, the idea generally. And the second was to, find a platform to be able to achieve that or to implement that. And for a few decades, or 2 or 3 decades, there had been just a revolving door between two major political parties. And had that been had the arena been confined to just those two political parties, one was led by Mian Nawaz Sharif, or the other was the Bhutto family, I would not have entered or ventured into this field, because I had a certain view about both those families and about their approach to politics, about their dynastic leanings, about, in my view and in my party's view, their emphasis of self before the state. And here was Imran Khan's party, which I felt was, a genuine outfit which was designed and, whose leader inculcated, number one, and he has a huge anti-corruption stand, and then secondly, the whole track record he had in all other fields, may it be sport, may it be philanthropy in terms of health, may it be education, may it be relief and rehabilitation services. There's all the things he had done in Shaukat Khanum, the Trust, the Tehreek-e-Insaf, Imran Khan Foundation, Namal University. So there were these series of achievements which demonstrated that here is a man who has, who could have lived a comfortable life anywhere he wanted, and he could have been rolling in money as a cricket commentator, as a writer, as a sports personality, but he chose to abandon all those luxuries and all those other pursuits and focused on serving the country.
Why do you have to give up luxuries to become a good politician? Does it really matter, or is it a requirement, or do you really see that in his case even?
Well, the context in which it is relevant in his case is that he is a simple and austere person. When you are not interested in those luxuries or those material pursuits, you don't possess that greed, unfortunately, that is endemic in our political system and in our political elite, which has always has monopolized power, and a political elite between which and the poor population of Pakistan there is a tremendous gulf. So here is a person who came there to, as I said, who is not possessed with that avarice, that greed, is an honest, upright man, and his focus is on doing good for his country and his people.
You also ran for the National Assembly.
I contested in National Assembly, yes, on the 11th of May 2013. I was one of the victims of the widespread, or fairly widespread,
alleged
rigging, non-compliance with law, violations of electoral statutes, and all kinds of strong-arming, corrupt practices, everything. Yes, unfortunately, it was very, very prevalent. I wouldn't say it. There are 272 National Assembly seats, and then of course there are another 800-900 provincial assembly seats. All the elections for all those seats were taking place at the same time. There was selective but widespread selective rigging in certain places. Lahore was one of them. Karachi was another place, and the idea was to it seems, and now it's under investigation. Our position is that it was designed in a way to enable one particular party.
What they call it, a munazzam sazish, like
munazzam by design,
by
and
design,
an organized endeavor. It certainly appeared to be the case in particular pockets. And you see, if there is a government which has a majority in the National Assembly by 20 seats or so, over and above the simple majority figure. And it turns out 40 or 45 or maybe 50 National Assembly seats have question marks on them, or the elections there were so badly conducted, leave aside rigged, so badly conducted. The election record is so has so many holes in it that the election becomes questionable, then it knocks out the majority.
The problem is, since we don't have the other side to respond to these allegations, of course, these are, as we speak, they remain allegations.
And they are under investigation. They are under investigation right now.
This is a position that you're...
And that in itself, by the way, is an historical endeavor. The 126-day protest. This is the first time in the history of Pakistan.
And of course, again...
that we are having an election looked into, examined in this way.
Yes.
Well, my party chairman is optimistic that the findings will be as we have alleged. But let's, as you said, let's see the other side, and let's see, because they're getting getting a full. But it is noteworthy. It is noteworthy then when our protest started in August of 2014. All the political parties, aligned together and came to a joint sitting of Parliament in Islamabad, condemning us.
Well,
and
they
then,
wanted to, in their opinion, or what was their stand, that they wanted to save the system because they thought the system itself was threatened. And so, at this
and the irony of it all, the irony of it all is that on the 15th of April, 16th of April, when the Judicial Commission had its first sitting, 21 political parties went there with proofs of rigging and election irregularities.
Including the ruling party.
Including the ruling
Very
party,
good.
yes.
Walid Iqbal Sahab, we just have to take a short break, and after we come back, like I said before, there's a lot more to his personality and his background than just politics and law. So when we come back, we'll talk about those facets and aspects too. Please stay with us.
I felt that there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done in, simplifying the message and communicating it in a language, in a manner, and through means that are within the reach of the common Pakistani.
Welcome back. I'm Faiz Rahman and you're watching Cafe DC. Our guest here is Mr. Walid Iqbal, and as I promised before, there's a lot to his background and his personality than just being a lawyer and a politician. Mr. Iqbal is also the son of a very famous jurist, Dr. Javed Iqbal, and above all, the grandson of Allama Iqbal, Allama Sir Muhammad Iqbal. So I did a great job of hiding it until now. I just couldn't. So again, welcome back to the show. And personally, for me and for the Pakistani American community, this is a great association for respect and reverence. And so this part of our show will be about Iqbal. And I know being the grandson of Iqbal is not just a qualification to be on a show or to be just respected. You have to have your own. And mashallah, you have done very well for yourself. And recently you have taken up this task of explaining Iqbal's work with this context in Pakistan, the current context in Pakistan, to the common man, to the grassroots. Tell us about what you're trying to do with Iqbal's message to the current Pakistani situation.
Well, Allama Iqbal's life and works, works particularly, they comprise an ocean of knowledge.
Absolutely.
And contrary to what some critics of his say, that there are contradictions inside all of what he has said and believed and disseminated. The people who know him, the real Iqbal Shanas people who understand and who appreciate and who studied them closely, recognize and acknowledge that there is an incredible unity. There is an incredible unity in his work, a consistency in his work, and there are, some very, very basic messages that can be derived from his teachings, his poetic works, his lectures, his papers, his speeches, addresses, etc. And what I'm endeavoring to do is, when you meet an average person, an average educated person, a young average educated person, several of them say yes, they express admiration, and several say yes, he's a big guy, but we had such difficulty, in our school trying to grasp him and trying to understand, and it was a real torture.
Very unfortunate, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there is that attitude. So what my endeavor is, and what I'm endeavoring and hoping to do, particularly having become a part of the political process. Now, what I just described to you are, educated people who've been to nice, decent schools. There is such a large part of Pakistan's population which is, semi-educated, semi-literate, or not educated at all.
They know Iqbal, but they don't get his message.
Exactly. They know his name, they know what he looks like, because his picture's everywhere, and they know that, his birthday is a national holiday and things like that, but they have no understanding of his message. So my endeavor, and particularly after having gotten involved in the political process and having gone from door to door, visiting all kinds of people, meeting voters and constituents, I felt that there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done in simplifying the message and communicating it in a language, in a manner, and through means that are within the reach of the common Pakistani. And a common Pakistani would only stand to benefit from that, because the message has got a lot of it's very motivating. It's what I would say uplifting, and this is the kind of stuff that Pakistanis need in these challenging times, because we have a state which is a hard state, as they say, not a soft state, but a state which has a lot of issues with national integration, in law and order,
identity
terrorism,
crisis for
identity
that,
crisis.
we just don't know
things,
what it means to be a Pakistani these days. That's
absolutely.
So how do you see Iqbal's message to helping answer these questions?
Well, I think I will start from at least this political structure, and very briefly, there is no argument about the fact that he had a preference for a democratic setup over and above any kind of monarchy or dynastic rule or dictatorship or despotism. But having said that, the kind of democracy, we do have a democratic setup, but the kind of democracy we've been practicing or we have in place is so imperfect that it does not meet the standards of Allama Iqbal. And I think we need reform. Leave aside rigging and irregularities and non-compliance with law. I mean, I will posit some very basic questions, having been through the process. Is our National Assembly, are the doors of our National Assembly open to the common man and to a poor person? No, it's all big money. Our provincial assemblies, are the doors open for the poor people? No. The reserved seats, the Senate, there is only a small class of people that that finds its place, its way over there. And Allama's message is much more egalitarian in terms of that kind of democratic setup. There is a lot of emphasis on the character of the people who are to represent the population in those august houses. Unfortunately, we do have these eligibility criteria, but it's never implemented. The Amir of Jamaat-e-Islami, Sirajul Haq, last year when he took office, one of the first speeches he made, he said that if the eligibility criteria stipulated in our constitution is applied to members of our parliament, 75% of the people who are sitting in the National Assembly or the Senate will be sitting in Adiala jail. That's what he said. So there is that. Plus there is a more egalitarian system, and in a letter Allama Iqbal writes to Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, I believe it dated around 30th of May 1937, about 11 months before Allama Iqbal died. He mentions in that the concept of social democracy, what he had in mind was something similar to what we have in Scandinavian countries. Social democracy is not revolutionary as far as the Islamic structure is concerned, but it is in fact a return to the original purity of Islam. So like the 19th century reformer Muhammad Abduh, I'm reminded of what Muhammad Abduh famously said, that I went to Europe and I saw no Muslims but Islam everywhere, and I come to Muslim countries and I see all these Muslims but no Islam. So that kind of system. Plus
since we are almost out of time, Wali Sahab, so I mean, if there's one thing, one message briefly that you think would help Pakistan evolve into a greater model of what your grandfather preached, what is it?
Absolutely, and I will very briefly. And though there are 4 elements to that message, whereby at the individual level and at the collective level, a person's and a community's khudi is elevated. The first quality or first element or first value is passion or ishq. The second is dervishism or non-materialism. The third is courage, jurat, and the fourth is azadi or independence. So not to go for taqleed, which is copycatting, but to go for ijtihad, to be creative, to be innovative.
Which
those
was basically was his,
those are his messages basically.
And he basically reiterated these messages throughout his work.
Throughout his works, his Persian works, his Urdu works, his poetry, his prose, all over the place.
It's such a pleasure having you here, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for taking time out.
Thank you for having
to be
me.
on Cafe DC. Absolutely. Thank you very much for this watching this episode of Cafe DC. Until next week, this is Faz Rahman, and you're watching Cafe DC. So long. Khuda Hafiz.